Jae Crowder will not be at Phoenix Suns training camp, all but spelling the end of his tenure here in Phoenix. So we already knew the Suns were pursuing trades for Jae Crowder. What does this latest development do for his trade value, his potential trade landing spots? On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll break it all down. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. A big thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Monday morning. It is Media Day. By the time many of you are listening to this, I'm sure all of us media members will already be anxiously awaiting James Jones, Monty Williams, Devin Booker, Chris Paul, everybody speaking to the media to kick off training camp, kick off the season, really. So really appreciate you spending your day here to catch up on everything, get ready for what's coming. But the weekend brought us a big bombshell. So, of course, you guys can follow along at Locked On PHX Suns. Please hit subscribe or follow wherever you're listening or watching. If you're on YouTube, drop me a comment telling me what you want to happen with Jae Crowder, because we already know now he will be he's not one of the people that I will get to interview over at Media Day on Monday morning. The Suns even going so far as to release a statement acknowledging that the team and Jae have mutually agreed that Crowder will stay home during training camp while both sides explore a trade. This all comes after Crowder had retweeted Dwayne Rankin, the beat reporter of the Arizona Republic, frequent guest on this show. Dwayne just put out a harmless tweet basically saying all of the things to watch come training camp on the Suns side, and Crowder just retweeted it saying, number 99 won't be there. And then he deleted the tweet, but everybody had already noticed by that point. And then he posted a video, a tribute, basically like a really well-produced tribute video to himself based on his time in Phoenix. That went up on Instagram and Twitter. So it's all but done here. And the team going so far as to release the statement just reinforces that what Shams Charania originally reported, which is that the player and team will be spending training camp apart, is it's the beginning of the end. Okay, so quickly, I think it's worth looking back at how it got here. Okay, so again, trade rumors around Kevin Durant this summer and Eric Gordon and others. Like, we know the Suns were active. They didn't do a ton when it was all said and done, but I would imagine just knowing that Crowder is in the last year of his contract, that his salary is pretty tradable, being at $10 million. That's an easy number to move if you need to. That he was in a lot of those rumors, right? We also know there's a looming Cam Johnson extension. He could be promoted to starter. He'll very much get an opportunity to win that starting job. I think we can all assume. Those things are probably first and foremost. Those are probably front of mind for Jae Crowder. But again, I've mentioned this several times over the course of the summer. There was visible friction between Crowder and Chris Paul dating back to round 2 of the playoffs. If you remember, I believe it was game 1. It may have been game 2, the fourth quarter. There's a moment that was caught on camera where the two of them sort of, nothing too intense, but Crowder sort of waves Chris Paul off as CP is trying to go back over a defensive breakdown. And you know, if it's not to read too much into what was caught on camera, but if you imagine that's what the TV people caught, you can only imagine what else might have been going on, right? It's not crazy to think there might have been some tension, not only between Crowder and Chris Paul, but with the way the series ended up going and the tensions that we know were going on everywhere in that organization on the basketball side by the end of that series, Crowder being looped into that would not surprise anybody. And then, you know, I think that's all fair, but then there's this other side of it where, you know, I was at practice the day before game 7. I was at the facility. We interviewed everybody. who was all, I believe it was Mikhail, Jay, and Book were all, made available. And you would not have known anything was wrong with Jae Crowder that day. Okay. So as much as we can point to that moment on screen where they, him and Chris had the situation or whatever it was, or you can point to any of that, Crowder was just fine that day. So I don't know. I think it's not exactly like the most appealing answer I can give anybody here, but it's the truth. I don't have a great answer for why it has gone south, but the fact is it has. The fact is I don't think Jae Crowder will ever wear a Suns uniform again. I don't know how long this will last, but he's clearly not going to be around this organization anytime soon. So considering we knew it was headed toward a parting of ways, and this is an even more aggressive version of that, does this hurt the leverage? Because we know the Suns were already looking at trades with Crowder. That's been out there for a bit. We know that John Gambadoro was able to add a little bit of context with the Bojan Bogdanovic trade. He ends up going from Utah to Detroit, but he had been connected to the Suns for a bit. Gambo basically said that those talks hit a snag when the Suns wanted Jared Vanderbilt, who was part of the Rudy Gobert trade, somebody who the Jazz may or may not, you would have maybe not known if they even care about him, right? So I think it's smart for the Suns to ask. I think Vanderbilt slotting in as an option at power forward would have been an incredible addition to this team. He's somebody at that 4 spot who can play defense, who's a great athlete, but also just a smart, young, developing player who could have gotten better. So we know Jay would have likely been involved there. And there's probably been some other stuff along the way that didn't get reported. Does this hurt the leverage? I think is the question, right? Because if they were already looking at trades, we've already known of a little bit of a problem between the organization and Crowder with social media stuff and everything else all summer long. Does Jay going out and posting, a tribute video and the team releasing this statement and then, Crowder not being around for the start of the season, does that hurt the value that Crowder might have in a trade? Because that's where this is. As ugly as that is to be talking, solely about a player as some sort of bargaining chip, I think that's just where we are. So we have to be realistic about it. Let me lay this out, okay? I think in the recent past, you've had a up and down, hit or miss in terms of does sitting out actually hurt the trade. So the Thunder, right? They got a first-round pick. They did have to take Kemba Walker back, who they end up buying out. But they got a first-round pick for Al Horford after Al Horford had sat out. Okay, so it did, yes. It allowed the Celtics to get off of Kemba Walker, but Al Horford was not on an expiring contract by any means, so he was on a pretty sizable salary too. I think all in all, Horford sitting out did not hurt his value all that much, and they were able to make a good deal in Oklahoma City. Philadelphia, right? We know this one. Everybody knows this one. Ben Simmons sits out all year with mental health and the back problems and everything else. Well, him plus a few first-round picks becomes James freaking Harden. Okay, so that one turned out pretty well for Philadelphia. But then I would say on the other side with the Rockets, they get John Wall back in the Russell Westbrook trade. And John Wall doesn't really play for them very much at all. And then they end up having to buy him out. There's no trade that comes together. They don't get a deal done. And I think all in all, you would say that was not a great outcome, right? So it can go either way. I'm not trying to say this will go well or that Crowder, going public with this is a good outcome, but I also don't think it ruins the Suns' ability to get something done. I think they need to act quickly, both to, limit how ugly the situation might get with Crowder, but also just because I don't think they can necessarily afford to let this ride out the way that the Sixers did with Ben Simmons, right? The Sixers had the luxury of having an MVP candidate in Joel Embiid, and even then they were about a 500 team with Ben Simmons sitting before they got Harden, right? So it's easy to do that when you have Joel Embiid. I don't think Jae Crowder is some sort of MVP candidate here, but I also think the Suns are going to need bodies in the rotation at that spot. You're talking very soon about, are they going to have to play Dario Saric at the 4, which is not his natural position at this point in his career? Are you going to have to play a lot of Josh Okogie or Damian Lee, or is Mikal Bridges going to have to play the 4 a lot? These are not things the Suns were planning on doing. Maybe the bottom line is a lot of Torrey Craig, although he's not been a very productive player since rejoining the Suns last season. So I would say they are going to do this quickly, but I don't think that the Crowder going public is going to be this death sentence for the trade value. I think they can still get a fair deal. I think they can still get a productive rotation player in a trade with Crowder. And as long as they do it quickly, all of that will happen. So I've talked about a lot of specific trades, but I think at this point in time, the most valuable thing to do might actually be to separate teams in the Jae Crowder sweepstakes. So I have it mapped out as teams who are tanking, who would buy him out and allow him to choose his next team. And then the other category is contending teams who just might want him to join their squad and go compete for a championship. We'll talk about both of those groups after the break. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by BetOnline.net, your number one source for football betting info all year long. Find the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game that you can imagine. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for sports wagering info with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport, including football. Week 4 odds already up here at BetOnline in the pro football world. The Arizona Cardinals 1.5-point underdogs on the road in Carolina. I personally kind of like that line as a starting point. I think it'll move in the Cardinals' direction. I think it'll move in the Panthers' direction. So maybe you wait it out. But either way, I think that game will be competitive. The Cardinals look better this week. That's just me. Maybe I'm drinking a little bit of Kool-Aid there, but I truly believe it. I've watched every minute this team has played, and that's where I come down. But it's not just football, baseball, MMA, boxing, golf, all of it available at BetOnline. Not just betting, but news, analysis, and more. Head to betonline.net or use their mobile app to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. 2 groups of Jae Crowder teams here. So I've talked a lot about specific players, but again, James Jones tends to operate in silence. So rather than trying to construct and concoct a whole trade that ends up sounding silly in 24 hours when they get a deal done, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to give you teams, and as I said, have separated them into categories. So category number one is tankers who would buy Crowder out. So what that would allow is obviously Crowder could get traded to that team. Maybe they get a little bit of value on the deal itself. And then most importantly, they go ahead and they buy him out, and then Crowder gets to go wherever he wants. Maybe that's the Lakers. Maybe that's I don't know, right? But he gets to dictate his own path in that situation. So I have 3 teams in this category. Number 1 is Oklahoma City. Something like Darius Bazley and Mike Muscala is sort of like the junior varsity version of the Bojan Bogdanovic and Jared Vanderbilt trade that the Suns, we know now, according to John Gambadoro, wanted to do. So Bazley's a little bit worse than Vanderbilt. Muscala's a little bit worse than Bogdanovic. But maybe that's the best the Suns can do, right? I don't know. I don't think Bazley's a hopeless player. I think bringing him into a good team could do a little bit for him. Maybe he can get a little bit better as a shooter if he's being fed by Chris Paul as opposed to, Josh Giddey. I don't know. I think that's an option. Number 2, the Houston Rockets. This one will not surprise any Suns fan who has been paying attention. It's Eric Gordon, right? We've been talking about Eric Gordon since last year's trade deadline, but he's still available. He's still a Houston Rocket, and I think he could still help the Suns. So his salary is a little bigger. You're probably talking about a slightly more expansive trade. So that might be Eric Gordon for, let's say, Jae Crowder and Cameron Payne. But, if Gordon becomes sort of your third guard, then you don't need Payne as much. And both of those guys are on expiring contracts, as is Eric Gordon, who is non-guaranteed next year. It's sort of just flipping salaries around, but the Rockets aren't trying to win a ton of games. So maybe they're okay if they get some players in the door who don't fit perfectly, but Cameron Payne could be somebody that plays for them, and Crowder would probably get bought out. Number 3 is the San Antonio Spurs. And as far as I can tell, guys, this is kind of a side note, but these are the only 3 teams that are really going to be tanking. So maybe that complicates the trade options here, but I think those 3 teams all could be interested in a deal. So it probably doesn't hurt too much, but it is interesting. Not a lot of tankers here in 2022. This deal would probably be straight up something involving Josh Richardson and Jae Crowder, or Doug McDermott and Jae Crowder. And I would not be chomping at the bit to get that deal done if I'm James Jones. I think you could do a lot better. But again, desperate times call for desperate measures. Crowder has now put his chips in the middle of the table a little bit. And I think, again, a deal will happen sooner rather than later. So if the Suns have to just go ahead and get Josh Richardson, I think they could do worse, but I also think they could do better, which brings us to the contending teams. Who are the contenders who would want Jae Crowder? Because really, when you look back at Jae's career, he's basically been on contending teams his entire existence as an NBA player, and that is no coincidence. This is a player who, because he's good on defense, he's versatile, and he can make threes, he can fit anywhere. I think we've obviously seen during his time in purple and orange that there are some limitations, but contenders are going to be the number 1 teams wanting to get the services of Jae Crowder into their building. So almost all of these are in the Eastern Conference. I don't know if that's a given, but if I were James Jones, I would be a little bit reticent to ship off a very good player to a contender in my conference that may go ahead and play me in the playoffs come next April and May. So 5 out of the 6 of these contending teams are Eastern Conference teams, just as a preface for this. But number 1 in this category, the Boston Celtics. Something like Derek White for Jae Crowder and Cameron Payne. We know they were shopping Derek White in the Kevin Durant sweepstakes. It would not be a surprise if they used White to get another 3-and-D player in there, considering he was not a major factor come the end of the finals. So White as a third guard for the Suns, I think could be really good. I think Crowder filling in for Gallinari and some of these other losses that the Celtics have sustained could be really good. They did just get Malcolm Brogdon, so they don't need another guard quite as badly. I think this one makes a decent amount of sense. Number 2, the Chicago Bulls. Jae Crowder for Javonte Green and Kobe White. I've seen that one being posted online quite a bit. It's not a very big return, but I do think Kobe White is the type of player the Suns could use. I don't think he's the best they could do, but I think he would play. I think he would get a shot in the rotation, and that's a pretty good return for somebody who has asked out from your team. Number 3, the Miami Heat. Talked about this one a lot. Duncan Robinson in a first for Jae Crowder and Torrey Craig. There's not a lot of wiggle room. A lot of the players that the Heat signed this offseason are not available right now because they only sign for 1-year deals, or they make too much, or they make not enough, or they're too valuable to the Heat. There's not a lot of different permutations of this trade, but I think Duncan Robinson would play a ton of minutes for the Suns. I think he would be pretty valuable. I still believe in him as a playoff player, and we know the Heat have a big hole at power forward. Number 4, the Milwaukee Bucks. This one is another one that I've seen online a lot. Jae Crowder for Grayson Allen. You have to put one more little salary in on the Bucks side. So Serge Ibaka is who I found. I'm not sure he has a lot more left in him as an NBA player, but it's just salary, really. The main thing you're getting is Grayson Allen. I think he would play for the Suns. I'm not sure if he's a playoff guy, but you could do worse. Number 5, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Jae Crowder for Cedi Osman and Dylan Windler. Now, Windler's been hurt a lot, but he's a nice shooter, as is Osman. This is just 2 sort of, middle-of-the-road forward shooters to fill in the place behind Crowder. I don't love this deal. The Cavs don't have a ton of flexibility. They either have young guys on rookie contracts, or they have really expensive guys like Garland, like Allen, like Love, like Mitchell, obviously. So I don't know if there's a deal there with Cleveland, but I think Crowder would be a really big help there, so I could see why they might want to pursue him. Last but not least here on the team's list, So this is the one Western Conference team, and the only reason I included it is John Morant of the Memphis Grizzlies, as everybody knows, quote tweeted Jae Crowder's basically his goodbye post to the Phoenix Suns and said, "Back soon." So I don't know if John knows something we don't know or if he's just goofing around, but I do think Crowder would be a pretty solid fit on this Grizzlies team, which is a little bit of a coincidence because he was not very good the first time he was on this Grizzlies team in 2019. But maybe if he shoots a little better, the rest of the team's a lot better, he could be part of something pretty cool. The only real trade that I see here, because so much of the Grizzlies roster is recent first-round picks that don't make a lot of money and that they probably value pretty highly, the only real player I could see moving in this trade would be Dillon Brooks. He's on an expiring contract, but he'll be restricted. So maybe you could see the Suns trade for him and then extend him like they did with Landry Shamet. Maybe they just trade for him and then, go into restricted free agency next year and see what that looks like. We know the Suns had interest in Dillon Brooks back in the Trevor Ariza trade. He's somebody who I think would help as a point of attack defender next to Mikal Bridges, somebody else who can do that, but doesn't really fit in terms of how Monty Williams wants to coach offense. So that is a big old TBD, but Memphis seems like an interesting landing spot. Ja tweeting makes it even more interesting. And I do think Brooks is somebody who makes some sense for the Phoenix Suns. Before we get out of here, I want to give you my prediction for Media Day storylines. This is an annual thing that I think is just kind of fun to do to see how much of it I can get right. We know Robert Sarver will be relevant here. We know Jae Crowder now will be asked about, talked about a lot. But what else? What else will be the narratives coming out of Media Day about this Phoenix Suns team? We'll get into those next. First, one more quick break. Nine o'clock Phoenix time, Monday morning, is Suns Media Day. We know the main storylines will be Robert Sarver selling the team, selling the Mercury, and Jae Crowder's absence. I think that's pretty obvious. Those are very, gossipy, newsworthy little tidbits. But what else? I actually think this is a good scenario for the Suns who kind of crapped the bed in that game 7 of round 2. I think it allows them to double down together to just sort of get that, fog of war mentality or whatever that is called. The guys that are in, what is that word? It is the World War I tunnels. Everybody just in there getting into it together. And I think that could be what this is. I think that could be what you see, especially by not having to talk about it too much, because we've talked about a lot of the motivation that's going to come from losing that game. It's a different kind of motivation than what happened in the 2021 finals, which was, holy crap, we've landed on something really special. Let's see what we can do next year. That was, I think, the mentality coming out of Milwaukee. You saw, James Jones double down and run it back with the same roster. Everything pointed toward, if we can do this again, we'll break through. You can't convince yourself of that anymore. But if you're able to just fix the problems, focus on the task at hand, and get better as a group, I think that's a whole heck of a lot easier than constantly having to talk about your own failure. So some of these other distractions, so to speak, I think the team might actually appreciate a little bit of that distraction in this case. But with all that said, I want to give you 6 predictions for storylines and narratives coming off of Media Day that are non-Sarver, non-Crowder. Number 1, Chris Paul lessening his load. I think we will come away from Media Day feeling like Chris Paul is willing to accept fewer minutes and less responsibility. Mostly because he has to. I don't think it's tenable to continue to put so much on him, have him continue to get injured, or whatever it is that leads him to break down. You can't have that. He knows that. Everybody knows that. And I think he will accept it. And I think tomorrow we will hear him express that. Number 2, Devin Booker is the leader of this team. I think this is the year where that transition starts to happen. I mean, for all we know, this is the last fully guaranteed year on Chris Paul's contract. There's a world in which this is his last year as a Sun. I don't know if that will happen. I'm not making that prediction right now. But at some point, this team stops becoming a Chris Paul team and becomes a Devin Booker team. And there's no better time than now. He just signed a Supermax extension. He is getting named as a top 10 player across the internet. He's on the cover of 2K. He's a perennial All-NBA player at this point. Like, he's earned that. And I think he has earned the respect of his teammates and everything else. I think this is the season where we really start to see that Book takes the reins back of this team and starts to lead and get the ear of his teammates and just be the face again. I think he always has been, but he's shared it a little bit lately. And I think this will be the season where it's his again, fully. Number 3, DeAndre Ayton will finally get to do more on offense. And I think this will be another big trend in terms of what will be talked about. We're deciding to bring DeAndre back. What's his role? What have the conversations been to get on the same page with him? Does he get to finally try some more things out because he's been brought back, etc.? I think we will come away from Media Day feeling like, yes, Ayton is going to get more opportunity and more responsibility to live up to his potential even more than he has. Number 4 is Cam Johnson. And I think we'll come away from Media Day feeling confident that Cam will sign an extension. If you read the interview, the Q&A that Dwayne Rankin did with James Jones at the Arizona Republic, he asked Jones about Cam's extension, and Jones seemed to be pretty confident. I've seen some people who have said, it makes Cam a little bit harder to trade if he's locked in on a new deal. And I hear that. I kind of feel like if they're deciding to extend him, that he will be a little bit off limits in trades for a little bit, but I could be wrong. I just think either way, they're not going to overpay for him. And if they get him on a fair contract, I kind of tend to believe that's pretty tradable anyway, even if the other team who's getting him would prefer to have those negotiations for themselves. I still think it's possible and probable that he could be included without much of a problem. And I think we'll hear that. Not the trade stuff, but the momentum around an extension, I think we'll hear about, and that'll be one of the big stories. Number 5, James Jones is the North Star of the franchise. And yes, this is an offshoot of the Robert Sarver stuff, but look, James Jones seems to have been operating ad hoc by himself, solo, for most of this summer. He's hiring more people to the front office staff. He's hiring new assistant coaches. And a lot of that seems to have been happening without Robert Sarver, maybe because they knew a punishment was coming, maybe because Sarver had made a decision to be a little bit more hands-off anyway. I don't necessarily know the why, but I can definitely look at patterns and tell you that that did happen. And so I think that will continue to happen. I think if you do hear chatter about Sarver, it will be redirected back to Jones. A lot of we trust James. We believe he's setting us on the right course, and we're ready to go where he leads us, basically. 6, and certainly not least, but the last one on my list, Monty Williams is ready to adapt. Maybe this is something that I'm personally just more interested in, but coming off of that Game 7, I don't think it's tenable for Monty to just proceed with business as usual. Yes, you can and should, if you're Monty, make the case and rest on your laurels of how much progress you've made in a really short time, the fact that everybody's still young and getting better. All of that's true. You don't want to abandon that as the crux of what you're building as a leader, but I also don't think you can just continue to do things the same way. I think that includes more defense and more variety on defense, different looks, switching more, etc. And on offense, not putting so much on Chris Paul, but mixing things up, developing your talent offensively better throughout the course of the season so that guys like Mikal and Cam Payne and Cam Johnson are willing and ready to step up when they need to. DeAndre Ayton obviously in there as well. So I think Monty, knowing how humble and thoughtful he is, he will be ready to talk about himself changing at Media Day. And I think you'll hear a lot of chatter about how he needs to just change some things about how he structures the on-court X's and O's of what this team is. And I think he'll be ready for that, and I think it will happen. I do think he'll walk the walk come opening night and beyond. That'll do it for today's show, guys. Crowder might be on a different team by the time that you hear this, and I'll have a show for you if that happens. In the meantime, Media Day, lots to talk about there, so do not miss a show. Hit subscribe, hit follow on whatever platform you're finding us. Drop a comment below, once again, telling me what you would do if you were James Jones as it pertains to Jae Crowder. And before we talk next, make Locked On NBA your second listen to catch up on everything else going on around the league.